So another place that I thought could use some more stitching is the Kraken, the giant Kraken that I added to my scroll some months ago. And I wanted to give its surface more texture, so I'm going to use something that we've used before in my turtle here and also in some of the coral pieces that we did. It's a deflected or distorted blanket stitch. And so the way that it works is you create a row of blanket stitches just as you would normally do your blanket stitch. So I just want this to be a slight texture on the surface of my Kraken here. I don't want it to be really bold. I want it to be subtle but textured, so it's more than just a giant piece of cloth there. It's got my own stamp of stitching on it, and possibly this could easily have been done with more running stitches, but I decided just to try out something else. So I've done my first row of running stitches in that area there, and now what I'm doing is I'm going back and doing a second row above the first row, but I pull gently on that crossbar of the first row as I'm going back to create the second row there, and that creates kind of like honeycombs or cells, or depending on the thread that you use, it could create a very rounded appearance. I find that mine tend to create kind of more of a straight line, and I really like the way it looks. I feel like the look that it creates here is very much like scales, which I don't know what a kraken looks like. They're imaginary creatures, so I feel like they may well have scales. If you'd like to see some brilliant ways that the stitch is used, look up Miriam Heelan or Miriam Textiles, either on Instagram or on her Patreon channel, and she really does beautiful, beautiful things with this stitch. I will leave some links in the description box for this video for you to look up if you like. So I'm thinking about whether I want to cover the entire surface of my Kraken with these scales, and I don't think so. I think I'm just going to add it here and there, and I've talked about contrasting and blending in. My Kraken is a bright orange, and I've chosen a lighter peachy pink color to use to create those scales. So I want them to show up a little bit, but not to be really a high contrast where there's really harsh lines there. And I could have gone with a slightly darker color, sort of a slightly darker red color, and that would have created a subtle texture as well. And it's just a matter of preference. It doesn't have to be really dramatic to have an impact. And you know, these things may not be noticeable to people, and my daughter once told me, "Mom, sometimes enough is enough." And maybe you think that this is too much and you don't have to do it, but I like to try things out and see how it looks, and maybe it'll give me some ideas for other places that I could use this sort of stitch. And you'll notice that I did some other kinds of stitches, some back stitch or some stem stitch on my Kraken's face that make it look like it's frowning or has some wrinkles up there. That was another one of my attempts to give it a little bit more presence and give it a little bit more cohesive and finished look. So I probably could create some other types of stitches. I could do some straight stitches, some little speckles on my Kraken's body. There are all kinds of things that you can do to add texture and more interest, so it's just not a big flat piece of cloth. So another thing that I did with my Kraken, and I've already started this, is I added some French knots along the tentacles there to mimic the suction cups. And I've got this really cool variegated yarn here, and I think that that would be a fun addition to the underside of my tentacles there, to add lots and lots and lots of French knots here. And you can do as much as you want. If you're having fun, add more. If you're not having fun, then don't do it. I just really liked watching the way that this variegated thread shows up in the different stitches. And again, it's a imaginary creature, so I can just throw any realism out the door. I think in actual actual octopi. Their their suction cups are pretty white, and that would be fine too, but I like having all of these different colors. So in this area, the previous ones that I did were in a green silk ribbon, and now I'm using a variegated dollar store cotton thread, and it'll add contrast and variation and diversity to this part of my Kraken. One thing about French knots is that they do sometimes get tangled if you're not careful and paying attention, and you can usually untangle them if you're very delicate and don't tug on the stitch. So you have to unwind it a little bit. Well, that's how I think of it. Undoing it and being gentle with it is better than pulling tightly on it. And I've probably mentioned this before. One of the problems with French knots is that you can't really take out one knot if it goes awry. You have to take them all out. So I try very hard not to have to take out my French knots. So if I get something that tangles up, I try very hard to integrate it to make that part of my design element rather than taking it out. But that time I was able to get the knot out. And that's pretty much all there is to it. There's nothing really complicated going on this month. Lots of easy stitching. For many people, this is a really busy month. It actually, for me, is not so busy because I don't really like the busyness of December, so I tend to retreat and hibernate from the world, from all that frenetic energy out there. How about you? Do you enjoy all the busyness of this time of year, or do you find it overwhelming as well? And I'm just going to keep going doing this until I run out of thread or until I feel like I don't want to do this anymore, and then I'll do something else, because that's pretty much how I roll. I just keep adding until I don't feel like doing it anymore, and then I do something else, and maybe I'll come back to this later on and add more of these stitches later, or maybe while I'm doing this I'll get a really good idea about what I can do to modify another part of my scroll. And here I've got another knot, and again I'm going to see if I can gently untangle it. Often if you're gentle with those French knots, you can unravel them. And once again, thanks for watching, and I will see you again soon. Bye for now.